For 3 decades, Russia billed Arena M as the ultimate active protection system, APC, that would push its tanks to the cutting edge and render them nearly untouchable by anything short of the most cataclysmic munitions. The promise was simple: bolt a ring of smart radar sensors, a computerized fire control brain, and perimeter launch tubes onto a tank, and you transform it into a self-defending machine that swats down incoming threats. Yet after all those years of work, the battlefield verdict in Ukraine is starkly different. Russia's armor keeps meeting its match, not from exotic missiles, but from cheap, disposable drones that cost a fraction of a tank shell. Arena M has been around in one form or another since the late Soviet period, but surged back into the spotlight during the war in Ukraine. Western outlets repeatedly amplified claims about new iterations that would supposedly make Russian tanks immune to Ukraine's anti-tank weapons. In August 2024, David Hambling asked in Forbes whether Arena M might make Russia's tanks invulnerable to Ukrainian drones, outlining how the system is meant to work. Russia began fitting the APS to many new T-90M tanks, already protected by layered metal, ceramic, and composite armor, precisely because Ukraine's top attack munitions and overhead drones had exposed a fatal vulnerability that inches of steel could not fix. Arena M's advertised concept is straightforward. External radars feed a computer that, in theory, discriminates real threats from clutter and then triggers interceptor charges from launch cells around the hull and turret, engaging targets across a stated speed window and within a short protective bubble around the tank. As 2025 began, rumors intensified, and photos of T-90Ms wearing the new kit surfaced from inside Ukraine, implying the APS had finally reached combat deployment. Roughly a month later, a Russian promo video, flagged by Militani, staged Arena M intercepting a ground-skimming grenade and a missile in the upper hemisphere. The implied message: it can stop whatever Ukraine throws, perhaps even a javelin. But even that footage hedged the claim, showing a gentle, oblique inbound angle rather than the steep pop-up profile that top attack missiles actually use, leaving big questions about real-world performance. Then, in August, Army Recognition reported that Russia was extending Arena M to older T-72s as a retrofit. Work, it said, had begun the previous October. Another signal that Moscow hoped to harden more of its increasingly Soviet-era fleet. If Arena M were as effective as advertised, we would expect to see Russian armored columns pressing harder. We're not. A prominent Russian military analyst, Viktor Murakovsky, punctured the hype in reporting highlighted by Defense Blog: Arena M's radars are failing at the task that matters most in Ukraine: detecting, classifying, and queuing intercepts against small, low-signature drones, including FPV systems built with radio-transparent plastics. Worse, he noted, the sensors struggle to separate such targets from ground clutter at short distances, precisely where the system must react within its limited engagement envelope. The deeper problem, he argued, is that radar methods borrowed from classic air defense, such as Doppler and moving target indication, don't work well against slow, tiny, terrain-hugging UAVs with minuscule radar cross-sections. Ironically, even sympathetic Russian voices have argued that low drone visibility shouldn't be a showstopper because a lethal FPV typically carries a metal heat warhead, yet Arena M still doesn't pick them up reliably. That leaves two unflattering possibilities. Either the APS can't see drones at all, but sometimes sees larger threats like RPGs or missiles, or its radar is so brittle it even misses the easy targets it was supposedly built to defeat. In the better of those two scenarios, Arena M still can't address the chief killer of Russian armor in this war, drones, meaning it fails the only exam that counts. It helps explain why, despite press shots and one-off appearances, Arena M has not shown up in meaningful numbers at the front. United 24 Media has suggested those deficiencies are precisely why Moscow hasn't fielded it en masse. Wide deployment would expose its limits immediately under the relentless pressure of Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles. In the vacuum left by a non-solution, Russian crews have improvised. Welded cope cages, ad hoc screens, and ramshackle anti-drone sheds are now ubiquitous, so much so that manufacturers have displayed them at defense expos, as the war zone noted back in 2023. They're crude, often ineffective, and easy to bypass, but they exist because automated, reliable counter-drone suites still aren't available at scale. This isn't only a Russian headache, the broader defense world is still catching up. As Security and Defense Quarterly research by Mohammad Zeid Chari points out, today's jammers, handheld disruptors, lasers, and even high-power microwave concepts are all strained by the sheer density and tempo of FPV attacks. And quantity has a quality of its own. The Kyiv Post reports Ukraine's drone industry could produce up to 10 million UAVs per year with adequate investment. Even a perfect Arena M would face basic math, limited launch cells versus swarms. Knocking down a few UAVs helps until the next wave arrives and the magazine runs dry. The numbers bear out how little APS hype has changed the armored balance. On January 26th, the UK Defence Journal estimated Russia had lost on the order of 10,000 tanks since the invasion began, roughly 280 plus per month across nearly 3 years. By November 8th, the Kiev Independent put losses above 11,330, a slower monthly pace, but likely because Russia has fewer serviceable tanks left to throw at fortified lines, not because survivability has transformed. Novaya Gazeta, citing ISW, reported in June that Russia was down to about 46% of its pre-war reserves, on paper still thousands, but in reality the dregs, vehicles needing heavy refurbishment or cannibalization. An OSINT review published October 8th by United 24 Media and the JOMPI Group used satellite imagery to argue that usable T-72B stocks had cratered from several thousand to double digits, with only a small fraction in decent shape and the rest listed as poor or essentially wrecks. All the while, Moscow has poured money into counter-drone tech. BNE and Telenews estimated about $500 million in spending in 2024, second only to the United States, and forecast the market growing over the next 5 years to the billion-plus range, with the vast majority of civilian enterprises installing some kind of anti-drone system by spring 2025. Yet Ukraine's deep strike tempo has increased, and Russian armored losses continue to mount, underscoring that the most expensive line items haven't solved the cheapest threat. In that light, Arena M stands less as a revolution and more as a cautionary tale, a decades-long multi-million-dollar effort that cannot defeat the FPV era. For Russia's economy, already straining under wartime spending, tax hikes, and Western instruments, the cost of tanks that burn anyway is compounded by an APS that doesn't deliver. If Arena M were ever going to change the equation, we would see it by now. We don't. And until Russia fields a robust, automated, drone-centric defense that works at scale, its armor will remain exposed to the very weapon Ukraine has perfected.